I watched the Bordeaux spill across the white tablecloth like blood spreading in crimson tendrils that seemed to mirror the collapse of everything I thought I knew. My hand trembled as I stared at my father, Arthur Vance, sitting across from me with that calm, knowing expression that suddenly made perfect sense. Behind him, Marcus Thorne's triumphant smile was freezing on his face as the words my father had just spoken echoed through the silent dining room of the Onyx Room. The company has no board of directors, Marcus. It's a family business, and every single share belongs to me. That's when I knew I had been the perfect fool. The ideal pawn, the weapon Marcus had sharpened to strike at the heart of an empire I never knew was my birthright. And standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face was my daughter Chloe, who had known all along. But before I tell you how I clawed my way back from that moment of complete devastation, how I turned from betrayer to savior, I need you to understand something. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt used or manipulated by someone you trusted, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you ever discovered you were being played? Share your experience. Now let me take you back to where it all began 6 months before that catastrophic dinner. The morning sun hit the glass towers of Lower Manhattan like a promise of gold, and I stood in my corner office at Thorne Capital, 42 floors above the chaos of Wall Street, feeling like a king surveying his kingdom. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window showed a man in his prime, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent Patek Philippe watch glinting on my wrist hair. Perfectly styled jaw sharp, eyes hungry. The kind of confidence that comes from a decade of crushing it in the world of hostile takeovers and corporate raids radiated from every pore. At 38, I had made partner at one of the most aggressive private equity firms in the city, and Marcus Thorne, the legendary corporate raider himself, the man whose name made CEOs break out in cold sweats, had just handed me what he called the opportunity of a lifetime. I remember that meeting so clearly now, every detail burned into my memory with the acid of hindsight, the way you remember the moment before a car crash in slow motion. It was a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of crisp spring day that made Manhattan feel alive with possibility. Marcus had summoned me to his office at 8 sharp, unusual, because he typically didn't arrive until 9. That alone should have told me something big was happening. His assistant, a severe woman named Patricia, who guarded his time like a dragon guards treasure, had actually smiled at me when I arrived. Not her usual tight professional grimace, but an actual smile that showed teeth. Marcus sat behind his obsidian desk, a massive slab of polished black stone that had supposedly come from a quarry in Norway and cost more than a luxury sedan. His silver hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place despite the early hour. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost 5 figures, and his smile was that of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water, all teeth in predatory anticipation. The morning light streaming through his windows made his corner office look like something out of a movie about powerful men making powerful moves. Awards and deals tombstones lined the walls, each one representing a company conquered, a fortune made, a competitor destroyed. "Ethan, my boy," he had said, and I should have bristled at being called boy at 38, but instead I felt flattered. He stood up and came around the desk, which he rarely did. Marcus was a man who made people come to him. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, Macallan rare cask, even though it was 8 in the morning. "That should have been another warning sign. I've been watching you." He continued, handing me a glass. "You've got hunger, you've got vision, and most importantly, you've got the ruthlessness this business demands. That's why I'm giving you this." He slid a leather folder across the desk toward me, burgundy leather with gold embossing, the kind of presentation materials that screamed serious money. My hands actually trembled slightly as I reached for it, adrenaline already pumping through my system. This was it. This was the moment I'd been working toward for a decade. Recognition, validation, power. I opened the folder and saw the target, Vance Hospitality Group. My heart had actually raced with excitement, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The first page showed a portfolio of properties, beautiful architectural photographs of hotels and restaurants, the kind of old-world elegance that made you think of a different era. It was a mid-sized hotel and restaurant empire, profitable but old-fashioned, the kind of company that screamed for disruption. The financials on the next pages showed steady growth, but nothing spectacular. Conservative management. Traditional values. Debt ratios that were almost laughably safe. Employee retention rates in the high 90s. customer satisfaction scores that were impressive, but suggested no urgency to innovate. Everything the old guard loved, and everything my generation knew, was dying. "This is a sleeping giant," Marcus had continued, his voice smooth as silk, hypnotic in its certainty. "Run by an old man who's stuck in the past. Arthur Vance built it from nothing 50 years ago, right after he came back from Vietnam, and he's been running it the same way ever since. Premium locations, loyal employees, quality service, all that sentimental garbage that looks good in a mission statement but kills your margins. But he's left money on the table for decades. The properties alone are worth 3 times what the company trades at. Look at these numbers." He had leaned over and flipped to a page showing property valuations, and he was right. The real estate portfolio was worth a fortune, but the company's market cap didn't reflect it because the old man refused to leverage properly, refused to sell and lease back, refused to do any of the sophisticated financial engineering that could unlock that value. We modernize, we cut the fat, we flip it in 2 years for a fortune. Conservative estimate, we're looking at $400 million in profit. Your cut as project lead would be $40 million. $40 million. I had made good money, great money by most standards, but $40 million was generational wealth. That was never work again money. That was legacy money. I had studied the analysis he provided, turning page after page of detailed breakdowns. The opportunity was real. Vance Hospitality owned 23 high-end hotels and 15 restaurants in prime locations across the East Coast. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Charleston, Miami, properties in neighborhoods that had gentrified or were about to. The margins were good but could be better. Employee costs were high, benefits generous to the point of seeming wasteful. The average tenure of employees was over 12 years, which meant they were at the top of their pay scales. The man refused to franchise or expand aggressively, turning down opportunities to leverage the brand into new markets. It was everything wrong with old-school business thinking, the kind of sentimental approach that put people over profits and called it values. What's the play I had? Asked my mind, already racing through strategies, seeing opportunities in every line item. My expertise was in turning around underperforming assets, squeezing efficiency out of bloated operations, making hard decisions that soft-hearted founders couldn't stomach. "Hostile takeover," Marcus had said simply. "The old man won't sell willingly. He's got this ridiculous notion about legacy and family values. Thinks the company is his baby, his life's work, all that emotional nonsense. But here's the beautiful part." He leaned forward, his eyes glittering with something I now recognize as malice, but then read as excitement. "The company is vulnerable. Vance is sick, though he's kept it quiet. Cancer, from what my sources tell me. He's got maybe a year, probably less. No clear succession plan that's been made public. No board of directors because he's too proud to share control, still owns it all personally. That means no shareholder votes, no proxy battles, but it also means we can go directly to the stakeholders, the property managers, the key employees, even the vendors and suppliers. We make them nervous, make them see the writing on the wall. Old man dies, company gets tied up in estate proceedings. Their jobs are at risk. We offer stability, vision, growth. We make them an offer they can't refuse. We present a vision of modernization and growth that makes the status quo look like suicide. And here's where you come in, Ethan." He had paused for effect, letting the moment breathe, and I had leaned in, eager, desperate, even to hear how I fit into this masterpiece. My entire career had been building to something like this, every deal, just practice for the big game. "You're the face of this operation. Young, dynamic, representing the new generation of hospitality management. You understand the industry, but you're not stuck in its old ways. You'll lead the charge, present at the meetings, be the one who explains how we're going to take this dinosaur and turn it into something relevant. I'll provide the capital and the legal muscle, but you're the general on the ground. You're the one who'll convince them that change is inevitable and we're their best option for managing it." I had felt chosen, special, like I was finally getting the recognition I deserved after years of being overlooked, underestimated, treated like just another ambitious associate. For years, I had worked in the shadow of more senior partners, watching them take credit for my ideas, my late nights, my sacrifices. I'd been the one doing the real analysis while they took the meetings with clients. I'd been the one building the models at 3 a.m. while they played golf with investors. This was my moment to shine, to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight where I belonged. "Why me?" I had asked, trying to sound humble but failing completely. My voice had cracked with eagerness, and I hated myself for it even as I couldn't control it. Marcus had smiled then, and I remember now how cold that smile was. How calculated, how precise. It was the smile of a chess master moving his pieces into position for checkmate. Because you're perfect for this, Ethan. You're young enough to represent the future, but experienced enough to be credible. You've got the pedigree, the track record, the presentation skills. You're hungry for this in a way my other partners aren't. They're fat and happy, you're still lean and ambitious. Plus, and he had paused here, his smile widening. You're a Vance too, after all. A new generation of Vance ready to bury the old one. There's poetry in that, don't you think? I had laughed at what I thought was a coincidence, a funny bit of symmetry. Vance isn't exactly an uncommon name, I had said. Like Smith or Jones. What are the odds right I never connected it? Never even thought to ask if there was a relationship. Never wondered why Marcus found it so amusing. I was too blinded by ambition, too eager to prove myself, too hungry for the success that had always felt just out of reach, dangling like a carrot I could never quite grab. You see, my relationship with my father had always been complicated, a tangled mess of resentment and disappointment and unspoken expectations that neither of us could meet. Arthur Vance, though I only ever called him Dad. When I had to, when social convention demanded it was everything I wasn't. He was patient where I was impatient. He was content where I was ambitious. He was satisfied with enough while I always wanted more. He had spent his entire life building something stable and lasting, something that would endure beyond him, while I wanted to build something explosive and impressive, something that would make people remember my name. We had dinner once a month, a tradition my daughter Chloe insisted on maintaining despite my protests. And every single time it was the same polite distance, the same careful conversation about nothing important, the same feeling that I was disappointing him simply by being who I was. The worst part was that he never said it. Never criticized me directly, never told me I was a failure or a disappointment. He just looked at me with those sad, tired eyes, and I could see what he was thinking. That I'd lost my way. That I'd traded substance for flash. That I'd become exactly the kind of person he'd spent his life trying not to be. I had spent my entire adult life trying to escape his shadow, which was ironic because I never even worked in his business. I didn't even know exactly what his business was, just that it was something in hospitality, and it was apparently successful enough that he never had to worry about money. After college, I had deliberately gone into finance instead of anything related to hotels or restaurants. I wanted to make my own way, prove that I didn't need his legacy, his old-fashioned values, or his approval. I wanted skyscrapers, not hotels. I wanted Wall Street, not Main Street. I wanted to be known as Ethan Vance, master of the universe, not Arthur Vance's son. My mother had died when I was young, just 7 years old, breast cancer. That took her in less than a year from diagnosis to death. And my father had thrown himself into his work, building his company, while I was raised by a series of nannies and boarding schools. I had resented him for that, nursed that resentment through my entire childhood and into adulthood until it became part of my identity. Resented the way he seemed to care more about his employees than his own son. Resented how he knew the names of every housekeeper and line cook in his organization, but couldn't remember when my school plays were, when my baseball games were, when my graduation was. Resented how he had everything I thought I wanted, success and respect and legacy, but didn't seem to care about any of it, didn't seem to understand that winning was the whole point. So when Marcus handed me this opportunity, I saw it as poetic justice, cosmic validation, that my way was right and his way was wrong. I would take a company just like my father's antiquated business philosophy and transform it into something sleek and modern and profitable. I would prove that my way was better than his way, that the new generation had surpassed the old. That sentiment and loyalty and all those soft values he cherished were just weakness dressed up as virtue. For 3 months, I worked like a man possessed, like someone who knew this was his one shot at greatness. I analyzed every property in the Vance hospitality portfolio, spent weekends poring over financial statements and operations reports. I met with potential investors, crafting presentations that painted a picture of untapped potential, of a gold mine waiting to be exploited by someone with vision. I studied the competition, visited properties incognito, identified inefficiencies and opportunities that the current management was too sentimental to exploit. I built financial models that showed how much money was being left on the table by Arthur Vance's approach to business, by his refusal to optimize and leverage and squeeze every dollar of value from his assets. Marcus provided intelligence that seemed impossibly detailed insider information that I assumed came from industry contacts and sophisticated research, property values that weren't public knowledge, employee dissatisfaction surveys that should have been confidential, operational costs broken down to the line item level, contract terms with vendors, everything I needed to build an airtight case that this company was ripe for takeover. I should have wondered how he knew so much. I should have questioned why he was so focused on this particular company when there were bigger targets out there, more valuable opportunities. I should have asked myself why he needed me specifically when he had dozens of partners more experienced than I was, people who had led major deals before. But I didn't because I was too busy feeling important, too intoxicated by the attention and trust he was showing me. The presentation I built was a masterpiece, if I do say so myself. 147 slides of pure strategic brilliance. I called it Vance Hospitality 2.0, bringing excellence into the modern age. It had everything: market analysis showing demographic shifts and changing consumer preferences, growth projections based on aggressive expansion, modernization strategies that would reduce costs by 35%, technology integration that would improve efficiency and customer experience, brand expansion plans that would franchise the concept into 50 new markets. I proposed cutting staff by 30% through automation and outsourcing, eliminating redundant management positions that added cost without value, outsourcing housekeeping and maintenance to specialized companies that could do it cheaper, implementing dynamic pricing algorithms that would maximize revenue per room, and converting half the restaurants into food halls with rotating vendor concepts that would reduce labor costs and increase foot traffic. On paper, it would increase profitability by 40% in the first year alone, with projected growth of 15 to 20% annually for the following 5 years. I presented it to Marcus and his team of lawyers and investors in that same conference room where this had all begun. The one with the view of the East River and the mahogany table that sat 20. There were 12 of them, serious men in serious suits, the kind of people who controlled billions of dollars and decided the fates of companies with a signature. I stood at the front of the room with my laser pointer and my confidence and my beautiful slides, and I sold them on a vision of transformation. I was electric, passionate, convincing. I answered every question without hesitation. I anticipated objections before they were raised. I made them see what I saw: a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened, a fortune waiting to be made. I remember the applause when I finished, the way it filled the room and filled me with a pride I hadn't felt since I'd made my first million. Marcus stood up and shook my hand, his grip firm, his smile wide, his eyes bright with what I thought was respect. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly arrived. This was my moment. This was the deal that would make my career, that would prove I was more than just another ambitious kid from a good school. "Gentlemen," Marcus had said to the room, his voice carrying the weight of decades of success, "this is why I chose Ethan. He sees what others miss. He has the vision to transform, not just acquire. He understands that the future belongs to those who are willing to make the hard decisions to cut away the dead wood and let the strong tree grow. With him leading this transition, Vance Hospitality will be the crown jewel of our portfolio." The crown jewel. Those words had made me feel 10 feet tall, invincible, destined for greatness. We set the takeover in motion immediately. Legal documents were drawn up, thick contracts full of clauses and contingencies. Meetings were scheduled with key stakeholders, carefully selected targets who could be turned against the current ownership. Marcus's team began making discreet inquiries about purchasing shares from minority investors, though I learned later there were no minority investors to purchase from. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The old man Marcus assured me wouldn't even know what hit him until it was too late. By the time Arthur Vance realized his company was under attack, we'd already have commitments from enough key players to make resistance futile. During all of this, I still had my monthly dinners with my father. Chloe insisted on them, and I went along because she was the only family I had that I actually cared about. My daughter was 23, fresh out of business school, and working as my father's executive assistant while she figured out her career path. I had tried to discourage her from working for him, told her she was wasting her potential, but she had always been stubborn. She had always been closer to her grandfather than to me, something that stung more than I wanted to admit. One particular phone call with Chloe stands out now. It was 2 weeks before the dinner that would change everything. I was in my office reviewing the final takeover documents when she called. "Dad, are you busy?" Her voice had an edge to it I didn't recognize. Always sweetheart, but never too busy for you. What's up? There was a pause. I was wondering if you're still planning to come to dinner with Grandpa next week. Of course, wouldn't miss it. I had been distracted, only half listening, still reading through the legal provisions Marcus's team had drafted. Dad, can I ask you something? Another pause. That big deal you've been working on, the one you're so excited about? Do you know everything about it? About the company you're targeting? I had laughed, flattered that she was taking interest in my work. Know it inside and out, honey. Why? Just making sure you've done your due diligence. Sometimes things aren't what they seem. Sometimes the people we think are on our side are actually using us. I had brushed it off. You've been watching too many thrillers. This is business. Everything is documented, verified, legitimate. Your old man knows what he's doing. Does he? She had asked quietly. Does he really? Chloe, where is this coming from? Nowhere. Just forget it. I'll see you next week at dinner. Grandpa is really looking forward to it. He's been talking about it for days. I should have heard the warning in her voice. I should have pressed her on what she meant. But I was too caught up in my own success story to pay attention. The day before the dinner, Marcus dropped by my office personally, which was unusual. He was practically vibrating with excitement. Tomorrow night, Ethan. Tomorrow night we make history. I've got the final papers ready. Once you sign off on the presentation strategy, we move in for the kill. 2 weeks, maybe 3, and Vance Hospitality is ours. Ours, I had asked. Well, mine technically, but you'll be CEO of the new entity. President of Vance Hospitality 2.0. Think about it, Ethan. Your name on that company. Your vision brought to life. Everything you've worked for. My name on the company. I had loved that idea. Ethan Vance, CEO. A Vance running a Vance company, but the right kind of Vance. The successful kind. Actually, Marcus had continued. I was thinking I might stop by that dinner you're having with your father tomorrow night. I've got some business in the area. Would be good to see the old neighborhood, maybe grab a drink at one of those quaint places your generation loves. It hadn't seemed odd at the time, just a coincidence. New York was a small world when you ran in certain circles. The next evening, I arrived at the Onyx Room right on time. It was one of those restaurants that screamed old money wood paneling and leather booths and waiters who had been there for 30 years. The kind of place my father loved, and I found suffocatingly traditional. I had dressed in my best suit, not to impress my father, but because I always dressed well. Appearance was everything in my world. The maitre d', an older gentleman named Javier, whom I vaguely remembered from previous dinners, greeted me with a warmth that seemed excessive. Mr. Vance, wonderful to see you. Your father is already here. Let me show you to the table. The best table, I hope. I had said more as a statement than a question. I was used to the best. Of course, sir, though your father preferred his usual spot. You know how he is about tradition. I had followed him through the restaurant, noticing how every staff member seemed to nod respectfully as we passed. I had assumed they were just well-trained, but I see now that it was something else entirely. They weren't bowing to a regular customer. They were acknowledging their boss. My father was sitting in a corner booth, not the prominent table I would have chosen, but a cozy space with a view of the kitchen. He was chatting with the chef, an older man in white, who was laughing at something my father had said. When he saw me approach, the chef patted my father's shoulder with genuine affection before returning to his kitchen. Ethan, my father said, standing to greet me. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, with deeper lines around his eyes. But his handshake was still firm, his gaze still steady. Dad. I sat down, already feeling the familiar discomfort of these dinners, the weight of unspoken disappointments, the gap between who I was and who he wanted me to be. You look well, busy, I imagine. Always, big deal closing soon, probably the biggest of my career. He had nodded slowly. Chloe mentioned you were working on something important. She worries about you, you know, thinks you work too hard. She should worry about herself. I still think she's wasting her time working as an assistant. She should be in finance using that expensive education I paid for. She's learning valuable lessons where she is, my father had said quietly. Understanding a business from the ground up, seeing how real leadership works. There's no better education than that. I had bristled at the implication. My education has served me pretty well, thanks. Before he could respond, Javier appeared with menus and a wine list. My father ordered a bottle of Bordeaux without consulting me, which annoyed me. I would have chosen something more impressive, more expensive. But that was my father, always going for solid and reliable over flash and prestige. As we waited for our wine, I made the mistake of looking around the restaurant with a critical eye. The decor was elegant but dated. The table settings were beautiful but traditional. The menu, when I opened it, featured classic dishes prepared classically. It was everything wrong with refusing to innovate. You know, I had said, unable to help myself, this place could really benefit from some modernization. The bones are good, but it's too stuffy. People want energy, excitement, Instagram-worthy moments. This feels like stepping back in time. My father had smiled, that patient smile that always made me feel like he was indulging a child. Some people appreciate stepping back in time. Not everything has to be about the next trend. Some things have value precisely because they don't change. That's the kind of thinking that kills businesses, I had countered, warming to my subject. This was safe territory, talking about business theory instead of our relationship. The companies that survive are the ones that adapt, the ones that understand you can't rest on past success. You have to keep evolving or you die. And in all that evolution, what happens to the people? The chef you just saw me talking with has worked here for 35 years. He started as a line cook when he was 18. This restaurant put his kids through college. Is he just fat to be cut in the name of progress? If he's good at his job, he'll find another position. That's how the market works. The market. My father had said it like it was a foreign concept. Tell me, Ethan, how do you put a market value on loyalty? On institutional knowledge? On a man who knows every regular customer's favorite dish and remembers their children's names? I had felt myself getting defensive. You can't run a business on sentimentality. No, but you can't run one without humanity either. The wine had arrived then, interrupting what was becoming a familiar argument. Javier poured with practiced grace, and I noticed how he addressed my father as Mr. Vance, with a respect that went beyond professional courtesy. Again, I had assumed it was just good service. We ordered our meals, my father choosing the beef. Wellington, like he always did. Me selecting the most expensive item on the menu to prove I could. The food when it arrived was exceptional, I couldn't deny that. Every dish was perfectly executed, made with obvious care and skill, but I couldn't appreciate it. I was too busy mentally calculating how much the restaurant could save by using cheaper ingredients, reducing portion sizes, and speeding up table turnover. I had been in the middle of explaining to my father how the hospitality industry was changing, how customer loyalty was dead, and brand consistency was everything when Marcus Thorne walked into the restaurant. My heart had stopped. What were the odds? In a city of 8 million people, what were the chances that my boss would walk into the same restaurant where I was having dinner with my father? But Marcus didn't look surprised. He looked delighted. He made a show of scanning the room, then his eyes landed on our table and his face lit up like he'd just won the lottery. Ethan, what a coincidence. He had strode over to our table with the confidence of a man who owned everything he looked at. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd grab a quick bite. Fancy seeing you here. I had stood up confused and flustered. Marcus, this is unexpected. Isn't it? His smile was too wide, too perfect. He had turned to my father, extending his hand. You must be Ethan's father. I can see the resemblance. Marcus Thorne, I have the privilege of working with your talented son. My father had remained seated. He looked up at Marcus with an expression I couldn't read, then glanced at me. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been pity. But he didn't take Marcus's hand. Mr. Thorne, he had said, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. I know exactly who you are. Marcus had looked slightly taken aback by the refusal to shake hands, but he recovered quickly. Well, wonderful. Perhaps you've heard about the exciting project Ethan and I are working on. Really groundbreaking stuff. We're going to revolutionize the hospitality industry. That's when it happened. That's when my world started to crack. Javier had appeared at the table not with the deference of a waiter, but with the bearing of a general. Mr. Vance, he said, addressing my father, not me. Shall I have security? Escort this gentleman out, or would you prefer to handle this yourself? Security, my father, Mr. Vance. I had looked at Javier, then at my father, then at Marcus. What's going on? My father had finally stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but somehow in that moment he seemed to fill the entire room. Mr. Thorne, you're not welcome in any of my establishments. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. His establishments, your establishments. Marcus had laughed, but it sounded forced. That's rich. These are about to be my establishments, old man. Your son and I are going to make sure of that. That's when I noticed the restaurant had gone completely silent. Every diner, every staff member, every person in that room was watching us. And they were all looking at my father with the kind of respect and concern you reserve for someone important, someone who matters. Ethan? Marcus had turned to me, his mask starting to slip. Tell your father about our plan, about how we're going to take his little empire and turn it into something that actually matters. His little empire, I had looked at my father, really looked at him for the first time in years. At the way he stood with quiet dignity. At the way the staff positioned themselves protectively around him. At the way Javier the maitre d' was looking at Marcus, like he was something that needed to be removed from the premises. "Dad," I had said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is he talking about?" Before my father could answer, Marcus had pulled out his phone. "You want to know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about Vance Hospitality Group, the company your father has been running into the ground for the past 50 years. The company we're about to take from him. The company you're going to help me destroy." The room had tilted. Vance Hospitality Group, my father's company, the company I had been planning to take over, the target Marcus had given me, the opportunity of a lifetime. "No, duh," I had said, but it came out wrong, like I was choking. "No, that's not possible. You said it was some old man. You said his name was Arthur Vance, but that's a common name. That couldn't be my father. You couldn't have known." Marcus's smile had turned cruel. "Oh, Ethan, sweet, ambitious, blind Ethan. Of course I knew. Why do you think I chose you? You were perfect." The estranged son, desperate to prove himself, hungry enough to do anything for success. "I knew you'd never bother to look too closely at the target. I knew you'd be so eager to impress me that you wouldn't question how I had so much inside information. And I knew that watching Arthur Vance's own son destroy his legacy would be the sweetest revenge of all." "Revenge?" My father's voice cut through the chaos in my head. "What did I ever do to you, Marcus?" "You existed," Marcus had spat. 20 years ago, when I was building my first fund, I came to you for investment. I had plans, vision, the same kind of innovation your son now champions. And you turned me down. You called my strategies predatory and my vision soulless. You said you'd never invest in someone who saw businesses as just numbers to be manipulated. Do you remember that, Arthur?" "I remember," my father had said quietly, "and I stand by that assessment. Well, now I'm going to take everything you built and prove that my way is better than yours, and your own son is going to help me do it. Poetic, don't you think?" That's when Chloe had appeared. I don't know where she came from. Maybe she had been there all along, but suddenly she was standing next to her grandfather with tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she had said to me, and her voice was breaking. "I tried to warn you, I tried to tell you, but you were so convinced you were right, so sure Grandpa was the one who didn't understand business, that you never even bothered to ask what company you were attacking." I had reached for the table to steady myself. "You knew. I've known for weeks. I heard Marcus talking to his lawyers, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate you. I tried to tell you without telling you, tried to make you look closer at the deal, but you didn't want to hear it. You were too busy proving you were smarter than everyone else." I looked at my father. The disappointment in his eyes was crushing, so much worse than the anger I would have preferred. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was your company. I would never—" "Wouldn't you?" He had asked it softly, and that was worse than any accusation. "You've spent your entire adult life running away from me, from my values, from everything I built. You've made it very clear that you think my way of doing business is weak and outdated. Why wouldn't you jump at the chance to prove that?" "But I didn't know it was you," I had insisted, even as I heard how pathetic it sounded. "Marcus showed me the financials, the inefficiencies, the opportunities. It was just business." "Just business," my father had repeated. "Tell me, Ethan, whose jobs did you plan to cut? Whose livelihoods were just numbers on your spreadsheet?" I don't know their names. They're employees' positions that could be eliminated through efficiency improvements." "Carlos Martinez." My father had said, his voice steady, but his eyes hard. 28 years as head of housekeeping. He has twin daughters in high school, both honor students. He's the one who found your grandfather's watch when it fell behind a radiator 10 years ago and returned it even though he could have sold it. Maria Chen, 23 years in human resources. She helped you write your college application essays when you were too proud to ask me for help. Do you remember that, Ethan? How she stayed late at the office so you could drop by without me knowing. Each name was a hammer blow. Each person was a connection I hadn't known existed, a piece of my history I had been ready to erase for profit. "And what about Javier here?" My father had continued, gesturing to the maitre d' who still stood nearby. 35 years. This restaurant was his dream before it was part of my company. I bought it when he was struggling to keep it open, made him general manager, gave him equity. Under your plan, he would have been replaced by a 25-year-old with an MBA and no soul. I had reached for my wine glass, desperate for something to do with my shaking hands, and that's when I knocked it over. The Bordeaux my father had ordered, the wine I had thought too understated, spilled across the white tablecloth like blood, like a wound that couldn't be bandaged. Marcus had laughed at that, a harsh sound that cut through everything. This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. You're even more pathetic than I thought, Ethan. You didn't even recognize your own father's life's work. You were so eager to prove you were better than him that you became a weapon pointed at his heart. Get out, Chloe had said, her voice shaking with fury. Get out of my grandfather's restaurant right now. Your grandfather's restaurant, Marcus had mocked. See, Ethan? Even your daughter understood what you couldn't. She saw through me in a week. But you fell for it completely. You know why? Because you wanted to. You wanted to believe that you were special, chosen, destined for greatness. You wanted it so badly that you, quote, never questioned why it was all so easy. I had wanted to hit him. I had wanted to scream. I had wanted to disappear. But I just stood there frozen, watching my father's calm face, and Chloe's disappointed tears, and Marcus's triumphant sneer, understanding with perfect clarity that I had become exactly what I had always feared, a failure in the eyes of the people who mattered most. Security is here, Mr. Vance, Javier had said quietly. No, my father had replied. Let him stay. Let him watch this. He had gestured to Javier, who brought over a wooden box I hadn't noticed before. My father opened it slowly, and inside was a trowel, old and worn, and next to it a golden key mounted on a plaque. This, my father had said, lifting the trowel, is the tool I used to lay the first brick of my first hotel. I was 23 years old, fresh from Vietnam, with a GI loan and a dream. I didn't know anything about business then. I just knew how to work hard and treat people with respect. He set the trowel down and picked up the key. And this is the key to that first building, the hotel that started everything. I kept it even after we sold the property as a reminder, not of success, but of purpose. Every person who has ever worked for me, from the newest housekeeper to the most senior executive, gets one of these keys when they join our family. Because that's what we are, Ethan. A family, not a portfolio, not an asset to be leveraged. A family. He had looked at Marcus then. You asked me to invest in your fund 20 years ago? I said no because I saw what you were, a man who looked at businesses and saw only money, who looked at people and saw only expenses. I built my company on the opposite principle. Every employee matters. Every customer is a guest in our home. Every property is a commitment to the community. That's not old-fashioned. That's not naive. That's what makes us stronger than anything you could ever build. Sentimental garbage, Marcus had sneered, but there was something desperate in his voice now. Your company is worth a fraction of what it could be. You've left hundreds of millions on the table because you're too soft to make the hard decisions. No, my father had said, simply. I've built something that will last, something that matters, something my granddaughter is proud to be part of. Can you say the same about your empire of hostile takeovers and broken companies? He had turned to me then, and I couldn't meet his eyes. Ethan, I'm dying. The words hit me like a punch. Chloe made a small sound of distress, and I realized she already knew. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Tom. My father had continued, his voice steady, despite the bomb he'd just dropped. I've known for 6 months. I have a year, maybe less. I've spent that time getting my affairs in order, making sure the company would be protected, making sure the people who depend on me would be taken care of. Dad, I had whispered, and it was the first time I'd called him that, with any real feeling in years. I made a new will last month, he had said, and pulled a document from inside his jacket. The company and everything I own goes to Chloe. She's the one who understands what I built and why. She's the one who has the character to protect it. He had looked at me with such profound sadness that I felt my heart crack. Unless you can prove to me in the next year that you deserve it, that you understand what legacy really means, that you can be trusted to protect not just the profits, but the people. The will doesn't matter, Marcus had interjected, trying to regain control. I have lawyers, I have investors, I have documentation of board decisions. There is no board, my father had said, placing a thick folder on the table. I own 100% of the company, always have. I never took it public, never brought in outside investors. It's wholly mine, and it will be wholly my granddaughter's, unless my son earns the right to be part of it. Marcus's face had gone red. You can't do this. We have contracts. We have commitments. You have nothing, my father had said quietly. And you need to leave my restaurant now. Javier, please make sure Mr. Thorne understands he is banned from all Vance properties. With pleasure, sir. As security moved toward Marcus, he had turned to me one last time. "You were a perfect idiot, Ethan. I almost feel bad for how easy this was, but not quite." Then he had stormed out, his lawyers scrambling to follow. The restaurant slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in murmurs, staff returning to their duties. But at our table, time seemed frozen. "Dad," I had started, but I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" seemed too small. "I didn't know" seemed like a lie, because even if I hadn't known it was his company specifically, I had been ready to destroy everything his company represented. I had built my entire plan on the assumption that his way of doing business was wrong. "Sit down, Ethan," he had said, and I collapsed into my chair like a puppet with cut strings. Chloe had slid into the booth next to her grandfather, taking his hand. I noticed how thin his fingers looked, how the cancer was already stealing his substance. How had I not seen it before? How had I been so blind to everything except my own ambition? "I need to tell you something." My father had begun, his voice softer now. "When your mother died, I threw myself into my work. I know I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. I know you felt abandoned, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to understand why this company means so much to me." I had wanted to interrupt, to say it didn't matter, but he held up a hand. "Your mother and I started with nothing. I was a veteran with no education and no prospects. She was a waitress at a diner where I used to eat breakfast. We got married, and that diner had the reception in the back room. When we bought our first property, a rundown motel in New Jersey, we lived in one of the rooms while we renovated the others. We did the work ourselves, scrubbing toilets and painting walls and learning as we went." He smiled, lost in memory. "Your mother designed the lobby. She had this gift for making spaces feel welcoming. She would arrange flowers she bought from street vendors, set out books for guests to read, put up local artwork. She said every person who walked through our doors should feel like they were coming home, not just to a room, but to a place where they mattered." I had never heard this story, or maybe I had and I just never listened. "When she died, I wanted to die too. You were 10 away at school, and I was alone in a business we'd built together. Every property, every decision, every detail had her fingerprints on it. I could have sold it all, taken the money, and disappeared into grief. But I realized something. This company was her legacy. Every employee we hired, every guest we welcomed, every community we served, it was all an extension of her vision that people should be treated with dignity and kindness." He looked at me, then really looked at me. "I failed you, son. I was so focused on keeping her alive through this work that I forgot you needed me too. And you grew up thinking I loved the business more than I loved you. But you were wrong. I loved you so much it scared me. I was terrified I'd fail you the way I felt I'd failed her. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I worked. I built. I created something I hoped would make you proud someday, even if I couldn't figure out how to tell you that." Tears were streaming down my face, and I didn't care who saw. "But you," he continued, "you took all that pain and turned it into anger. You decided I was weak for caring about people. You decided sentiment was a character flaw. You built your entire career on being the opposite of me, and in doing so, you became exactly the kind of person your mother would have grieved to see." The truth of it was devastating. He wasn't wrong. I had spent 20 years defining myself as not Arthur, as not sentimental, as not weak. And in the process, I had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could be weaponized against his own father without even realizing it. "I have a year," my father said. "Maybe less. I don't have time for pride anymore, and I don't have time for resentment. So I'm going to give you a choice, Ethan. You can walk away right now. Take your career at Thorn Capital, pretend this never happened, and we'll part as strangers who share a name. Or you can fight for this. Fight for the company, fight for the people who depend on it, and fight to become the man your mother believed you could be." "How?" I had asked, my voice breaking. "How do I fight Marcus? He has lawyers, resources, connections. He'll come after you from every angle. Then you use what you know about him against him," my father had said. "You worked for him. You know his strategies. You know his weaknesses. Chloe tells me you're brilliant at your job, that you see patterns others miss. Use those skills for something that matters." I had looked at Chloe then, and she was watching me with a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that I would make the right choice, fear that I wouldn't. "Why would you trust me after what I almost did?" "Because you're my son," my father had said simply, "and because I believe people can change if they have a reason to. Your mother never stopped believing in you, even when you disappointed her. The least I can do is give you the chance she would have wanted you to have." That night after we left the Onyx room, I went home to my empty penthouse apartment and stared at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The man looking back at me was a stranger, Successful on paper, empty in reality. I had spent my entire adult life climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong building. I called in sick to work the next day, something I had never done in my entire career. Then I went to Chloe's apartment and we talked for hours. She told me everything she knew about Marcus's plans, about the threats he'd made, about the ways he was trying to undermine my father's company from within. She showed me documents she'd secretly copied, emails she'd screened, meetings she'd sat in on while pretending to just take notes. Grandpa knew, she had said. He knew Marcus was using you months ago. One of his property managers heard rumors and warned him. He could have confronted you then, could have shut down the whole thing, but he wanted to give you the chance to figure it out yourself. He believed you'd see through Marcus eventually. I didn't, though. You had to spell it out for me. But now you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What I did was quit Thorn Capital that afternoon. I walked into Marcus's office and dropped my resignation letter on his desk without a word. He had smiled that shark smile and told me I'd never work in finance again, that he'd make sure of it. I told him I didn't care. The look of confusion on his face was almost worth everything. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I went to work for my father, not as an executive, not in some made-up position designed to flatter my ego. I started in the mailroom of the corporate office, sorting packages and delivering documents. My father insisted on it. If I wanted to understand the company, he said I needed to understand it from the ground up, the way he had built it. The first few days were humiliating. People recognized me. They knew I was Arthur Vance's son, the hotshot finance guy who'd tried to destroy the company. Some were cold, some were curious. Most were just watching, waiting to see if I was serious or if this was some kind of game. I met Carlos Martinez in person, the head of housekeeping I'd planned to eliminate. He was a compact man with work-worn hands and a warm smile. When I introduced myself, he had looked at me for a long moment, then said, "So you're the one who thought I was expendable? Well, let me show you what expendable looks like." He spent the next week teaching me how to properly clean a hotel room, how to spot maintenance issues before they became problems, how to manage a team of people who worked hard for modest pay because they took pride in what they did. Maria Chen from Human Resources sat me down and explained every single employee benefit my father had implemented over the years. Healthcare that covered mental health and dental, childcare subsidies, tuition reimbursement, profit sharing that actually meant something. Your plan would have eliminated all of this, she had said, not unkindly. 4,300 people would have lost not just jobs but support systems. Would the extra margin have been worth that? I met Javier's wife, who told me about the restaurant opening 20 years ago, how my father had believed in her husband's dream when every bank had turned him down. I met the night manager at the Boston property, who had been homeless before my father hired him and gave him a chance. I met the wedding coordinator who had worked for the company for 30 years and had watched me grow up in the occasional photos my father kept in his office. Every single person had a story. Every single person mattered. And I had been ready to reduce all of them to line items on a spreadsheet. While I was learning the human side of the business, I was also investigating Marcus. I knew how he operated, knew the tricks he used to manipulate financial data and pressure boards. I spent my nights going through every document Chloe had copied, cross-referencing them with my own knowledge of his deals. And slowly a pattern emerged. Marcus was using shell companies to inflate his fund's performance. He would buy a struggling business strip. Its assets show artificial growth on paper, then sell it to another entity he controlled before the damage became apparent. He was essentially running a Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to old investors, while skimming massive amounts off the top. The documentation was buried in complex corporate structures, but it was there if you knew where to look. I took everything to Chloe and my father. We met in his study at home, a room I'd barely been in since childhood. The walls were covered with photos I'd never really looked at before. My mother's smile in almost every one. Me as a child before I'd learned to be disappointed in my father. Employees at company events, retirement parties, weddings. This wasn't just a business to him, it really was a family. If we go public with this, I had said, spreading out the documents on his desk. Marcus goes to prison. The SEC will have to investigate. His fund will collapse. But we have to be smart about how we do it. He has powerful friends and expensive lawyers. My father had studied the documents, his eyes sharp, despite his illness. You're certain about this? Completely. I've triple-checked every number. He's been running this scheme for at least 5 years, maybe longer. The question is how we expose it without him destroying evidence or fleeing. That's when my father smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in years. You know what your mother used to say? The best way to catch a rat is to let it think it's won. Then it gets careless. We spent the next 3 months setting the trap. I leaked information through my old contacts that my father's company was vulnerable, that the family was fractured, that there might be an opportunity for a hostile takeover after all. Marcus took the bait. He started making moves, getting sloppy, pulling money from other deals to finance his play for Vance Hospitality Group. During those 3 months, I continued working in the company, moving from department to department. My father was teaching me everything, and I finally understood what I'd been too blind to see before. This wasn't about profit margins and operational efficiency. This was about creating value that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. The loyalty of employees who would go to war for the company. The trust of customers who returned year after year. The respect of communities who saw Vance properties as assets, not intrusions. I also watched my father decline. The cancer was relentless. He grew thinner, moved slower, tired more easily. But he never complained. He came to the office every day he was physically able, meeting with employees, checking on properties, making sure everything was ready for the transition. He was preparing Chloe to take over, walking her through decisions, teaching her the philosophy behind every policy. And slowly, painfully, he was teaching me too. Not just about business, but about what it meant to be a man. What it meant to take responsibility for others. What it meant to build something bigger than yourself. One night, working late in the office, I found him in the boardroom, looking at old photographs. He didn't hear me come in. I watched him touch a picture of my mother, his fingers trembling slightly. I miss her every day, he had said without turning around. Every single day I wake up and forget she's gone just for a moment. Then I remember, and the loss is fresh all over again. I had walked over and stood next to him. In the photo, my mother was laughing, surrounded by employees, at what looked like a Christmas party. She looked happy, young, alive. I don't remember her very well, I admitted. Just impressions, the smell of her perfume, the way she hummed while she cooked. I was so angry at you for so long, I think I forgot to miss her. She would have been disappointed in both of us, my father had said. In me for letting work consume me. In you for thinking success meant stepping on people. But she also would have forgiven us both and told us to do better. How do I do better? You're already doing it. You're here. You're learning. You're trying. That's all anyone can ask. He had turned to look at me then, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Not disappointment, not judgment, pride. You know what I'm most proud of. Not that you're finally working for me. Not that you're helping take down Marcus. I'm proud that you had the courage to admit you were wrong. That takes strength most people never develop. We set the final trap in motion in late October. Marcus had called a meeting of his investors, promising them a major acquisition that would cement his legacy. He invited financial journalists, industry analysts, everyone who mattered in the world of private equity. He wanted to make the takeover of Vance Hospitality Group his coronation. I attended as his former employee, supposedly there to provide insider knowledge about my father's company. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been working with a financial journalist named Sarah Chen for weeks, feeding her information about his shell companies and fraudulent accounting. What he didn't know was that the SEC had been building a case based on the evidence I'd provided. What he didn't know was that instead of being his moment of triumph, this meeting would be his downfall. The conference room at Thorn Capital was packed. Marcus stood at the front, confident and commanding, describing his vision for transforming Vance Hospitality into a lean, profitable machine. He talked about cutting costs, maximizing efficiency, leveraging assets. All the things I had once believed were the keys to success. Then Sarah Chen stood up. Mr. Thorne, I have a question about some discrepancies in your fund's reported returns. She began listing dates and numbers, shell company names, and suspicious transactions. The room went silent. Marcus had tried to deflect, to dismiss her questions as unfounded speculation. But Sarah kept going, backed by documents. I had provided analysis. I had helped her understand. Other journalists started asking follow-up questions. Investors began to look nervous. That's when federal agents walked into the room. The lead agent announced that Marcus Thorne was under investigation for securities fraud, and they were there to seize company documents and question staff. The room erupted into chaos. I watched Marcus's face as he realized what was happening. He looked directly at me, and in that moment he understood. His perfect weapon had turned against him. The son he'd used to hurt the father had become the instrument of his destruction. "You," he had said, his voice shaking with rage. "You did this." "No," I had replied, standing up. "You did this? Every fraudulent document, every shell company, every lie to your investors. I just made sure people knew about it." As they led him away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, just a profound sense of relief. It was over. The aftermath was messy. Thorn Capital collapsed within a week. Investors lost money, though not as much as they would have if Marcus had continued his scheme. Lawsuits flew in every direction. The financial press had a field day. My name was in the papers sometimes as a hero who exposed fraud, sometimes as a disgraced banker who turned on his mentor. I didn't care anymore what they said. My father's company was safe. The employees were safe. That was what mattered. But my father wasn't safe from the cancer. By December, he was in hospice care at home. The doctor said weeks, maybe days. I moved into his house to help Chloe care for him. We took turns sitting with him, reading to him, just being present. One afternoon, when it was just the two of us, he had taken my hand with his thin, cold fingers. "I need to tell you something," he had said, his voice barely a whisper. "I changed my will. The company goes to both of you. 50-50 you and Chloe. She has the vision, but you have the skills. Together you'll be stronger than either of you alone. Dad, I don't deserve. You earned it. Not by being perfect, but by being willing to change. That's the hardest thing anyone can do. I'm proud of you, son. Your mother would be proud of you." Those were almost the last words he said to me. He died 3 days later on a Tuesday morning with Chloe and me holding his hands. It was peaceful. He simply stopped breathing, and the man who had built an empire on kindness was gone. The funeral was enormous. Thousands of people came, current and former employees, business partners, community leaders, customers who felt like family. Every person had a story about Arthur Vance's generosity, his integrity, his commitment to doing business the right way. I listened to them all, each one a testament to a life well lived, a legacy that mattered. After the funeral, Chloe and I sat down to figure out what came next. The company was ours now, and with it the responsibility for 4,300 employees and their families. "What do we do?" Chloe had asked. She was brilliant and passionate but scared. So was I. "We do what Dad taught us. We take care of people. We build something that lasts. We prove that you can be successful without losing your humanity." We made a pact that day. We would run Vance Hospitality Group together, combining her understanding of Dad's philosophy with my analytical skills. We would modernize where it made sense, but never at the cost of what made the company special. We would grow, but carefully. We would always remember that behind every number on a spreadsheet was a person with a family, dreams, and dignity. I didn't go back to Wall Street. I didn't miss it. The thrill of the deal, the adrenaline of hostile takeovers, the ego-driven competition, it all seemed hollow now. I found a different kind of satisfaction in improving employee benefits, solving operational challenges, and seeing the tangible impact of good decisions on real people's lives. A year after my father's death, on the anniversary of that terrible dinner at the Onyx Room, Chloe and I went back to the restaurant. Javier greeted us with tears in his eyes. "Your father loved this place," he had said. He used to say it reminded him of the first restaurant he and your mother ran together. He wanted it to be perfect, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. A place where people could come together and feel cared for. We had dinner at the same table where my world had fallen apart and been rebuilt. As I looked around the restaurant at the staff, who had worked there for decades, at the customers, enjoying carefully prepared meals, at my daughter, sitting across from me with her grandfather's strength and kindness in her eyes, I finally understood what my father had been trying to teach me all along. Success isn't about how much you make. It's about how much you matter. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die. It's what you build every single day through your choices, your values, and your treatment of others. My father built an empire not on ruthless efficiency, but on radical empathy, and that empire was stronger than anything Marcus Thorne could have ever created. Now when I walk through our properties, I don't see assets and profit centers. I see Maria's daughter who just graduated from college with a degree we helped pay for. I see Carlos's twins who work summer jobs at our hotels and dream of becoming architects. I see Javier's restaurant thriving, training the next generation of chefs who will carry forward a tradition of excellence and care. I'm not the same man who knocked over that glass of wine a year ago. I'm not the ambitious blind fool who almost destroyed his father's legacy for a pat on the head from a con artist. I'm still learning, still growing, still making mistakes. But now I'm making them while trying to build something that matters, surrounded by people who believe in the same values my father died protecting. The company is doing well. Better than well, actually. We've expanded to 3 new properties, all in communities that need good jobs and economic development. We've increased employee wages and benefits. We've invested in sustainability and community partnerships. And somehow, miraculously, we're more profitable than we've ever been. Turns out my father was right. When you take care of people, they take care of business. I still work long hours. I still face tough decisions. I still have moments of doubt. But now when I look in the mirror, I see someone I can be proud of. Someone my mother would have recognized. Someone my father died believing in. Here's what I learned from almost destroying everything that mattered. Your real worth isn't measured by your salary or your title or your reputation in the industry. It's measured by whether you made people's lives better or worse. Whether you built something that helped or hurt. Whether you left the world a little bit better than you found it. Marcus Thorne is in federal prison serving a 15-year sentence. I don't think about him much anymore. He was a symptom of a disease I was suffering from, the belief that winning mattered more than how you played the game. I'm cured now, though the treatment almost killed me. Chloe is getting married next spring. We're having the reception at the Onyx Room, of course. In her office, she has that wooden box my father showed me that terrible night with the trowel and the golden key. Under it is a new plaque that reads, "Build with integrity, lead with compassion, and never forget that the foundation of every great enterprise is the dignity of human beings." That's my father's legacy, and now it's mine to protect and pass on. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been so focused on proving yourself that you couldn't see what really mattered? Have you ever let ambition blind you to the people you were hurting? Have you ever had to completely rebuild your understanding of success? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever struggled with choosing between ambition and integrity, I want to hear about it. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below sharing your own experience with toxic ambition or finding your way back to what really matters. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Remember, it's never too late to change. It's never too late to choose people over profit, character over career legacy, over ego. My father gave me a second chance, and I'm spending the rest of my life proving I deserved it. What will you do with yours?